This is another edition of the video series on the posts from the open access blogs project, and we are reviewing another edition, another post. It is about the spectacle of power, the pivot to defense, and the search for everyday sanctuaries. So basically, this post was published on Substack on June 9th. And essentially it covers diplomacy, entourages as basically symbols of power and prestige internationally, and then basically the post covers similar topics from various analytical points of view, and basically it discovers the issue of the fragility of these spectacles. Basically, this power plays basically shows, and there is nothing behind that. And one can essentially agree with Guy Debord that this is part of the society of the spectacle situation, where I would say national and global politics are staged spectacles with a lot of self-consciousness. I think that a lot of PR agencies, a lot of work goes into that, especially in the social media age. And these basically renders diplomatic appearances, diplomatic meetings into spectacles, into very mediatized, very overrepresented spectacles, and it seems that those spectacles combine in themselves social hierarchies, soft power politics, and a lot of cultural baggage, so that these occasions become very loaded in meanings, in symbolism, and then we can shift to the economic tides. What happens, such as in the luxury sector, such as in the arms trade sector, and how that interacts with other sectors in the economy. And essentially, this post goes into some local news which are essentially evocative as vignettes of those trends, such as canteens in London and how these connect to urban culture and social change. So basically, these items are covered in the blog post, and essentially these items and these restaurants and the changes are perceived from the point of view of the culinary capitalism. Basically, how changes in the capitalist mode of the organization of urban life, of everyday life, are also intersecting with the culinary changes, such as intelligentsia in the high cuisine sector, and how that is being actually essentially picked up in the London food scene, and how that essentially gastro sector, how that sector's evolution is being reflected from the point of view of the analysis, or maybe larger scale economic changes, one would say. And this leads us to business and to the economic realignments in Europe. Basically, as the stock exchanges internationally are going through up and down cycles, that also affects a lot of in other words, it is not just American stock exchange, there are also European stock exchanges, and they go through those cycles, and that also enables certain sectors, such as the defense sector in Germany, to gain valuation as we have, I guess, global volatility on the one hand, and the growing need of Europe to defend itself on its own. And I think it explains the rise in spending on defense and the rising valuations of companies involved in that. And this is basically what this blog also covers, such as the strength of the luxury sector in Europe, and then the apparent rise of the defense sector in Europe and in Germany in particular, as it's spends a lot on the defense in view of the continuing war in Eastern Europe. So this is part of the context for that. And in the field of politics, one has Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, actually exiting from the governing coalition, and that essentially creates a splash in the European politics, and it shows essentially the fragility of the governing coalitions in democracies in the West in general, and in the Western Europe in particular, I would say, especially given the risks internationally. And this also relates to the risks of populism and how this can affect the stability of local governments, such as the Netherlands. And I think that the same quandaries, the same issues are present in other European countries, or maybe even in other highly developed countries, as the changes in the global economic relations introduce both fragility on the national level and then a need for resilience on the same level, so that national economies have to show that they can actually survive this period of turbulence internationally. And basically populist countries, populist leaders can definitely be tempted to capitalize on this, and the Netherlands is actually a showcase for that issue, and the fact that it can play out on the national level by affecting national politics, and of course in the European case also the European scale political composition, etc. And then we move forward to the geopolitics of technology and trade. We essentially are in the continuing standoff in between the United States and China, even though there are talks in between these great powers. There are attempts to mitigate the tensions, especially with regard to trade tariffs. But I think that the larger trend will of course be the decoupling of the US and China on many levels, and I think that this is part of the large, let's say, implicit conflict in between the, let's say, apparently rising power, which is China, and apparently a declining power, which is the United States. And I think that this sets maybe also the stage for, let's say, other countries in Asia, such as in Japan, to be showcasing what they can actually excel in these times, and such as design in Japan, and how that affects the imagination of the workplace spaces in Japan, and also I think further field in Asia, as it becomes a player in this kind of context. And I think that urbanism can become one of the levels at which those early topics, maybe of resilience, of local resilience, can also play. And I think a good counterfoil to that is I guess smaller design firms offering their visions of their urban life. And essentially this relates to politics, which can be played not only sort of played out not only on the national level or global level, but also on the local level, on the urban level. So that as local actors, as local, I would say, urban governments, organizations, activists are rethinking localism and how that relates to the environment as a landscape of action. That can also, I would say, make more important to nurture local talents, local capacities, local ability to survive hard times on the national and international scales as well. And then we are led by this strand of thought, of course, to places like Lisbon in Portugal, where local heritage of craftsmanship and cultural identity are being sought for and also celebrated as it becomes part of what makes the local identity of that place and how that is actually instrumentalized in the global competition for attention, for money, for investment flows. And I think this is what it is also about. As we have retail experiences increasingly globalized, increasingly homogenized, and as that also affects consumer subjectivities around the world, local context and local agents can be expected to look for their unique difference, their unique identity as essentially a selling point for what they offer, such as in terms of local authenticity, such as in other terms. Whatever it makes up the local, so that this is an implicit critique of the global capitalism as those global the corporate forces seek to annihilate essentially local businesses. And we can only think about, let's say, Amazon as a global company which saw over its rise a lot of smaller and medium scale businesses stop existing, stop operating, as those large-scale online retail operations have been eating into their profits, have been eating into their ability to survive. And this leads us to a conclusion which essentially makes a point of world in flux. Basically, this is one of the more, let's say, common theme in recent posts, as we have a lot of certainties to solve, as we have right now essentially a very uncertain period in global politics, in the global economy. The search for local authenticity can be one of those mechanisms through which resilience can be both shown or demonstrated and attained, and one of those also cultural mechanisms for coping with what is coming forth, because we cannot really assume that those economic measures, such as trade tariffs, will not have wider effects, wider ramifications, even though in many cases those measures have been either suspended or postponed. But I think that for the collective actors, for governments, companies or corporations, this is one of the more important signals for the need to rethink what they do in the present, and also looking towards the future. And the blog post ends essentially with a good quote from Virginia Woolf from her very famous novel To the Lighthouse. And it deals with both a need for miracles on a daily level, and I think that it resonates a lot with the current situation where we need a miracle maybe to save economic contexts, local contexts from maybe a disruption, for maybe rapid shifts in the global context, especially economically. And I think that this note of both hope and uncertainty very much closes well this well, essentially this edition of the open access blogs. You can have a look.